Good evening. My name is David Miller. I represent the transition group of Long Meadow, and we're here this evening to talk about the effects of climate change and how we might mitigate that. Our program is varied. First, we will have a discussion of what the elements of climate change are. Secondly, we are going to discuss and hear the insurance industry's approach to climate change and how they're concerned about its effects. And then lastly, we're going to hear about a program that's being introduced into the state legislature with regard to the possibility of placing a price on carbon and having that met at the gas pump with the returns to go to the members of the Commonwealth. Thank you.
Well, I'm here to support the environmental movement. I'm very glad that this activity is taking place in Long Meadow. And I was here, I believe it was 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, when they did a similar event. So it's my way of supporting an ongoing consciousness raising and environmental awareness in Long Meadow. I hope to get some ideas about what we're doing and what we can be doing.
Mainly, I really do think the whole issue of climate change is one that has to be addressed, and there are some very good solutions that are being recommended tonight, and I want to see how they're going to work. Carbon fee is, of course, one of them, but we are facing some very serious problems, and if we don't do something about it soon, like now, then the problems are just going to get bigger and bigger and soon be unsurmountable, and that I want to see. We would never want to see that.
Primary issues for just about everyone is global warming, and one of the ways we hope to at least curb that is through carbon tax. And this is going to be a pretty important event, I think, in informing both the participants and the public on what's being done, what the risks are, and all of the other issues surrounding carbon tax and global warming. That's why I'm here.
I'm here tonight because I believe that climate change is one of the most important initiatives we can be working on. And I think to sort of meet our state mandates of the Global Warming Solutions Act, which says we have to reduce our greenhouse gases by 25% by 2020 and 80% by 2050. One of the only ways we're going to get to that is by having a carbon tax. So we need to do carbon pricing, and tonight is about educating the community about carbon pricing and the need for that so that our subsequent generations might have a better shot at a higher quality of life than what we could expect from climate change.
There is no more important issue facing us today than climate change, and to learn more about it, and at least want to understand the fair carbon fee sounds like something that might really make a difference. Made a difference in British Columbia, Canada, which is a lot bigger than Massachusetts, so maybe it'll help.
Good evening and welcome. Thank you for coming to this evening's forum on climate change, two pays. My name is Marc, Chair of the Long Meadow Transition Town Group, which is the sponsor of tonight's event. This is actually the second forum our group sponsored. The first, last April 2013, was called Stewardship of the Earth, Climate Change and Behavior Change.
All right, so if I can stop here, let me just focus on the four areas that I'm going to talk about. The natural disasters, biodiversity, which is something that's so critical to our world, public health, which is something we don't think about a lot, and natural resources that we're using up and not replenishing. Okay, under the list of natural disasters, we have hurricanes, earthquakes, droughts, snowstorms, tropical storms, and fires. And unfortunately, as Bill Nye said, and Reggie Watts said, we are seeing these things on steroids now. Part of that has to do with the fact that the oceans are warming considerably. So what does this actually cost to you? So, and I'm only extrapolating for the years 2011, 2013. Hurricane Katrina was, at that point, we thought an outlier. There are three entities in government that really focus on disaster relief. One is FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Act. One is out of the United States Department of Agriculture and has to do with crop subsidies. That's the drought relief, and that's the money that goes to the farmers. And the third one is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Nobody has combined all of these pockets, so we're pulling information individually. FEMA, for these years, has totaled up $136 billion in what we paid. That does include Sandy, which was a big disaster. USDA, $26 billion. Most of that's been in drought relief and crop subsidies. A good portion of that is not going to the individual small farmers. It's going to large agribusiness, but they're still collecting it. Next. The Army Corps of Engineers spent $15 billion. Next. We've had a total of, for 2 years, $177 billion expended just on natural disasters. And if you could hit the last forward button, this is equal to $400 per household that you're spending right now. That doesn't include an increase in your premiums for a homeowner's insurance or flood insurance if you have a place down by the beach or something of that sort, or any other things that you're doing. California's drought, and if you look here, you see from 2011 it was a small little amount, and continuing on to 2015, the entire state is under emergency drought. The farmers have pulled together in the Delta, which is the central part where the heaviest is, to see about conserving water. And they grow, they're our breadbasket. What the cost to us is going to be, we're not sure yet, but certainly there may be a loss of certain agricultural commodities. And there also may be an increase of cost at the food stores because it's going to cost a lot more to grow these things. Wildfires, we're starting earlier and they're more intense. And of course our infrastructure, which is already aging. You have a flood, you end up with this in your road. But every time you have a disaster, you lose your infrastructure. This is a dust storm. This is not from Oklahoma in the 1930s. This is a current dust storm because of drought out in the west end. I think it's still Oklahoma, but this was just last year. What does it mean? Well, changes is happening, and this was the most startling thing for me because if you notice, a lot of things that were used to blooming at a certain time, maybe blooming earlier or later or something of that sort, having to do with the temperature change. But there's a mismatch now between the migratory birds coming forward, so we're actually having a rate of extinction about that because they come here, whatever they're used to eating along their journey back home or going, down south, like the snowbirds that they are. We are no longer able to provide the food that they need to have along the way. Their breeding seasons are off and their food availability is not there. So we're having an increase in extinction rate and reduction in birds and other pollinators because of the seasonal life cycle events. Next. The habitat ranges are moving northward and upwards. And we're going to find that certain species are not able to make that transition. So again, we have extinction rates that are going to be occurring as a result. As the food disappears, so do the animals, where they look for other sources. Coral reefs are disappearing at alarming rates. This is the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. And of course, if you don't have the coral, you're not feeding the aquatic life there that you need. We're seeing an increase in pathogens around shellfish, for example, crabs, oysters, anything with a mollusk. They're showing parasites that we've never seen before. And so that's going to have an impact and spread to humans. The vectors for spreading Lyme disease, tick-borne disease, mosquito-borne disease. We're seeing dengue fever in the southern parts of this country. It's never happened before, and that's something that has been strictly in the tropics, but of course as the temperatures warm, the mosquitoes are coming north. The International Panel of Climate Change estimates that between 20 to 30% of the plant and animal species that they have so far evaluated will probably be extinct if the temperatures continue to rise, and they are. Air pollution is up, and as a result, allergens and asthma is up. Wildfires actually has an impact on air quality, so we've got problems there. Your temperature extremes are causing problems with different parts of the population. I don't know the exact number, but the heat in India is so bad right now. I can't remember how many people have just died from the extreme heats. Precipitation extremes. Texas, I think there were 15 reported deaths so far from the extreme water. Diseases caused by the increased vectors. We do see the vectors being the bugs and pests that take the diseases forward. And we're also seeing an impact on natural forests and things of that sort. Food security, you wouldn't think that that would be something under public health, but it is something that the CDC is extremely worried about, because with rising temperatures, your whole eating patterns have to change, your whole growing patterns have to change, and we become more insecure around food issues. Food and waterborne diarrheal diseases, that's one of the things that happens after every storm that I go into. We are inundated with don't drink the water, we don't have potable water, so you're going to get all sorts of waterborne diarrheal diseases. And mental health and stress-related problems go up when you see these other things happening, and they also fluctuate with extremes in temperatures. Folsom, California, 2011, you can see the dam releasing water. That's what it looks like 2014. We're losing natural resources that people go boating in, they go fishing in, they enjoy skiing, whatever. Next. This was one of the most remarkable parts of the whole situation to me. Alaska is mostly built on permafrost. Permafrost contains methane, and as the temperatures warm, the methane is being released into the air, so we get the double whammy from that. But we're also seeing the permafrost totally evaporate, and they are now relocating whole villages in Alaska inwards. Entire ways of life are being lost. This was Glacier National Park. I had the pleasure of visiting it a few years ago when the glacier was almost non-existent. And you can see the difference between 1930-something and today. It is basically not going to be called Glacier National Park, but Grinnell National Park. All right, we're up to this. This is my iconic polar bear. He really would like help, or she would like help, and we need to really do it. We used to talk about mitigating the impact of climate change. Now we're talking about an adaptation, because we're past the mitigation point. And on that note, I am done.
I'm going to start with a quote from President John F. Kennedy. There are risks and costs to any program of action, but they are far less than the long-range risks and costs of comfortable inaction. Today there is a very vigorous public debate over whether to act now to stem climate change or instead to delay implementing mitigation policies until some future date. There are real economic and other consequences of delaying action. I think one of the points I just keep going back to when we think about global warming, it's not just that the world gets a little warmer. Maybe we don't like the world to be a little warmer. We had a really rough winter, right? It's not that. When the world gets warmer, and we've seen just about 2 degrees Fahrenheit rise in temperatures over the past century, everything changes. And that's what we need to understand, that when we talk about climate change, it really changes every aspect of life on this planet. Human life, plant life, animal life, etc. So with that in mind, let's look at some of the actual costs to us as a society. We know, especially on the Atlantic coast, that there are some hot spots with sea level rise. So far this century, on average, the global average is 8 inches of sea level rise. Some of these hot spots, particularly, for example, in Norfolk, Virginia, they've already experienced 16 inches of sea level rise. The entire U.S. naval base there has implemented actions to raise all of their docks to ensure that they have an active, functional port in the face of rise. This graph shows you a period of time, 30 years from 1980 to 2013. These are losses related to U.S. weather events. This is only on impact, so this is what is lost when that event takes place. The dark blue portion of those bars is the portion that the insurance industry picks up and pays for. The green portion is what everyone else ends up paying for. You can see on average it's no more than 50%. So when we talk about the costs of extreme events, it's our federal governments, our state and local governments, businesses, and individuals who are paying for those damages out of their pockets to get us back on our feet. You can see, though, there's no sort of portion of the nation that is exempt from these events. The impacts vary by geographic region, but whether it's drought in the west or extreme precipitation events in different areas, or hurricanes and snowstorm activity in the northeast, everyone is impacted in one way or another. This just gives you a sense of the sort of extreme events in 2011 and 2012. This is just a little bit of a zoom in on Hurricane Sandy's impacts in New York City and New Jersey, still fairly fresh in our minds. And by the way, this was not a Category 3 storm. I think it was fairly mild as far as hurricanes go. It was very large, but even so, tremendous impacts. You can see there in terms of the numbers of properties destroyed or damaged, flights canceled, nuclear power plants down, and the estimated cost to New York City of $33 billion. Similar impacts in New Jersey. I'm also aware that Hurricane Sandy caused damages in the Caribbean as well as far north as Canada. So this just gives you one particular zoom in on an area that was heavily affected. This gives you a little bit of a sense of what a place such as New York City is up against if we look forward in time. Following Hurricane Sandy, the City of New York hired Swiss Re, which is one of the leading global reinsurers, to use some of their catastrophe modeling capabilities to estimate what the amount of damages would look like in New York City if we go forward in time to the 2050s. So you can see there, in the current scenario, the average annual losses in New York City are $1.7 billion. In any given year, they may be higher or lower, but that's an average based on current weather patterns, as well as the infrastructure in the buildings that are located there. The average annual loss will be $4.4 billion. Of course, those are in constant dollars, and that assumes the city as it is today, with no additional building, no additional infrastructure, as well as no climate adaptation. That increase is roughly equally attributable to sea level rise, as well as more intense hurricanes, both related to climate change. So you can get a sense here of the fact that we've got more than doubling of the average annual losses to a place such as New York City related to climate change impacts. And such an insurance program probably won't be sustainable in the face of climate change. And then the last program, one more slide please, has to do with our wildfire protection costs. Again, those have tripled since the 1990s. The amounts budgeted for wildfire protection are inadequate right now, and they actually reflect about half of the total forestry's budget in the United States. This is an important report, and I want to just take a few moments on this. It came out last year in 2014 by the White House, really looking at future annual economic damage from temperature increases beyond 2 degrees Celsius or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. I always have to do that conversion so it feels more real to me. But that is the target in terms of the negotiations that are going to be taking place in Paris. If we can get a binding agreement, the goal is really to keep us below a global warming of 2 degrees Celsius to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. The price of carbon-based energy, i.e. coal, oil, gas, does not reflect the full costs or economic damages of carbon emissions. We're all paying those additional economic damages. Public policies are needed to reduce CO2 emissions and to limit the damage to economies and the natural world from future climate change. Delaying action significantly increases the costs in the long run. I use this with audiences that are more skeptical, the horrible consequences that await. What if it's a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? This whole climate change thing really doesn't hold any water. Well, we might get energy independence, or we might preserve rainforests, green jobs, livable cities, renewables. So there are a lot of co-benefits to a policy related to taking action to build a clean energy future. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you to Michele and to Marc for putting this great event together. Thank you all for coming out on this beautiful day to spend some time talking about this unbelievably important issue for our world. And thank you to our previous two speakers. I was thinking when I was sitting there that I need to have, every time I talk about carbon pricing, somebody go through methodically before I even get up to speak and name all the costs that are being imposed on our society by our dependence on fossil fuels. It's a great way of introducing the subject of carbon pricing, which is what I'm going to talk about here today. And more specifically, how the state of Massachusetts can lead the country and maybe even lead the world towards price on carbon. Fossil fuels impose great costs on our society, right? Costs in forms of the changing climate, costs to our health in the forms of air and water pollution, costs to our economic security, costs to our national security. Who pays those costs? Well, right now, the answer is all of us, the public. And I know there's been a lot of good talk here about the monetized costs, about the costs that you face as a taxpayer. But let's also remember that a lot of the costs that we're talking about are costs that are not easy to monetize and that fall disproportionately on poor and vulnerable populations among us, right? So the children in Springfield who grow up dependent on inhalers to be able to go outside at recess. The people throughout our state who are infected by climate-fueled diseases like Lyme disease and West Nile virus are men and women in uniform fighting over climate-related conflicts and oil-related conflicts in countries like Syria and Iraq. And our children and grandchildren, of course, and future generations, both here in the United States and all around the world, who should be paying those costs. Answer clearly is the fossil fuel companies. Coal, the oil, and the gas companies that are today raking in trillions in profits and are spending billions to manipulate our political system to suit their interests. According to a recent study by the International Monetary Fund, the failure of our economic system to properly account for the true costs of fossil fuels amounts to an annual subsidy of $5.3 trillion around the world. It's about $10 million going to subsidize fossil fuels every minute.
So it's very convenient. $1 per ton of carbon is pretty much equal to 1 penny per gallon of gas. So $10 per ton of carbon means about 10 cents per gallon of gas.
It's affordable now.
It's affordable now, and so we're going up. So the current legislation goes from $10 a ton up by year 6 to $40 a ton. So that's going to add about 40 cents to the price of gasoline. Although then again, you get the rebate that's going to end up covering your costs. And for most people, the rebate will be higher than the amount that they have to spend extra on gasoline. Yeah, it's funny, I didn't get into the British Columbia example, but British Columbia has been a big inspiration for this whole idea. So British Columbia started their carbon tax in 2008. It started at $5 a ton and went up to $30 a ton. Now I'm talking Canadian terms here, but in the same vicinity. And British Columbia then used that money to launch a whole set of tax cuts, So there were income tax cuts. There was cuts to the business tax in British Columbia. As a result of the carbon tax, or at least in part, British Columbia now has the lowest real income taxes and the lowest real business taxes in all of Canada. And during that time, the big success is that their economy has actually grown faster than the economy of Canada, and their emissions has gone down quite a bit. So it's been a very successful model. It's been very inspirational for those of us who are working on the campaign here in Massachusetts. We are doing things a little bit differently than they did. We don't want to cut the income tax. If you do it that way, then poor people don't benefit that much. In Massachusetts, really, you only have about 50% of the population that even pays income tax, and that's mostly the upper 50%. So we wanted to do this in a way that definitely would be progressive. And so doing it in terms of a cash rebate that you send to all residents, that turned out to be a very progressive way of doing it. So we're certainly inspired by the BC example, but trying to do things, a little bit in our own way. Well, I'm always an optimist, but it's important to be realistic at the same time. This isn't going to happen this month. It's certainly going to take a push from the grassroots in order to be able to make this happen. I think that this state, we've got so many advantages to doing it. Our economy is set up in a way that can take advantage of this really well. We don't have a lot of Republicans who deny climate change in this. We think that, we're going to be able to work with the administration, with the Baker administration. We've had some good contacts there that, make us hopeful, not that they're going to jump in with both feet tomorrow, but that, that they're open to this as an idea. So I'm optimistic. I think that this very much can happen. The state also does have binding climate goals, and we're going to need to do a lot more in order to be able to achieve our climate goals. This could be one of those things that really gets us those big reductions that we need. Yeah. Well, so what we've had probably like 9 or 10 events about this size. So, this is a great job that you did putting this together. There really are just so many groups around this state that are organizing on climate already, between the folks organizing on the pipeline, the folks organizing on divestment, all the MCAN chapters that are around the state. There are a lot of venues for people to talk about climate, and there are a lot of people who care about climate in this state. And, truth be told, caring about climate in Massachusetts is good politics. It's good politics not just in the Amherst and the Northampton and the Cambridge, but really I think throughout this state. And I think the legislature knows that. I think that legislators know that you want to be seen in Massachusetts as somebody who's going to take leadership on this issue.
Hi, I'm Michele Morantz, and I'm an environmental activist and a Longmeadow resident. I joined forces with Transitions to help plan this conference, and I'd like to talk with you tonight about our 4 objectives in putting the conference on and show you how we met them. Number 1, we wanted to have at least 80 people at the conference, and much to our pleasure, we had 88 people who decided that this was an important enough issue for them to leave their home on a work night. Secondly, we wanted to demonstrate, to make a case for the fact that there is a very high cost to our failure thus far to respond adequately to the challenge of climate change. Andrea Chasen, our first speaker, talked at length about the fact that there's been an exponential increase in the number of natural catastrophes, and these catastrophes have cost individuals and communities, as well as our nation, a great deal of money in order to help solve. Cynthia Michele, who worked for the insurance industry for 18 years, was our second speaker, and she introduced us to the notion that the insurance companies in the United States and abroad are already building into the cost of our home insurance rates their anticipated costs for meeting the economic consequences of these natural disasters. Thirdly, we wanted the people who came to the conference to leave with a sense of hope, because sometimes this issue can really be overwhelming when we think about a solution. Toward that end, our third speaker, Dan Gotti, who's Executive Director of Climate Exchange, talked at length about fair carbon legislation, 2 bills which are pending now in the Massachusetts State Senate. These bills are modeled on a highly successful piece of legislation that passed 8 years ago in British Columbia. And the consequences of the passage of that bill in British Columbia has meant that that province has reduced its carbon consumption by 16%, while all the other Canadian provinces have increased their carbon consumption, while enabling the British Columbian economy to boom. A win-win situation for everybody. Finally, even though this topic, climate change and what to do about it, is inherently a political issue, what we wanted to do is approach the topic in a nonpartisan way. Toward that end, we enlisted the help of a number of religious organizations in the area. St. Mary's Church, which was, has been extremely generous to us in providing the venue for our conference, and other churches like St. Andrew's Episcopal Church and the Unitarian Universalists and several synagogues, as well as the Western Mass Islamic Society. All of these groups came together to encourage their congregants to attend this conference, stressing the importance of our need to deal with this issue. What we're hoping our attendants do, and all of you who are watching this film do, is investigate fair carbon legislation, recognize its wisdom and its pragmatic value, and lobby our state senators and representatives to make this happen so that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, true to form, can be a leader and first in the nation to pass this very important legislation.
Hello, my name is David Miller. We've just been watching this evening a presentation of Climate Change, Who Pays? And I'm joined this evening by 3 members of the local community who are very interested in the issues of environmental change. These are Marc Coleman, MD, founder and president of Long Meadow Transition, Andrea Chasen, presenter for the Climate Reality Project, and Michele Marantz, environmental activist and a member of Climate Action Now. I'd like to ask each of our discussants how they got involved with this program. So Marc, we'll start with you.
5 years ago, I had the opportunity to hear Bill McGibbon, founder of 350.org, talk. He scared me about how the climate changes were occurring, how this was going to affect not only me, but particularly my children and grandchildren. So I started looking for ways to get involved. What could I, as a citizen, do individually? And I came across the organization Transition with Towns, which started in England 6 years ago. And the beauty of it is that it allows individuals and small groups, like the town of Long Meadow, to get involved with doing action. And you may have seen us at the Long Meadow Days. We have a presentation there. We were active in getting the Green Communities Act passed in Long Meadow. We sponsor the bike sale at the community house. 2 years ago, we started we had a forum at St. Mary's Academy. the beauty of transition is that it allows flexibility. So our group is non-political, non-partisan, not religious, but we were able to put together an interfaith symposium on stewardship of the earth. And it was well attended. We had Jewish, Catholic, Muslim, Protestant, different presenters, and we had about 90 people there. So on the basis of that success, we were approached recently by Michele to do another forum.
Very good. Andrea?
Yeah.
How do you come to this environmental issue with such interest and passion?
Well, like Marc, I had the opportunity of being introduced to the issue of climate change through the movie The Inconvenient Truth, and became incredibly worried about the existence of Earth going forward and how do we become better stewards. And I was fortunate enough to be accepted into a cohort of people getting trained by Al Gore to become a climate change presenter, which focuses on presenting the science as it is now to audiences to allow them to learn what's going on, make decisions about what they can do, both individually, locally, state, nationally, and then ultimately for the greater good of the world. And a couple of years ago, Marc asked me to join him in this forum so that I could present some of the science, and I've been involved ever since.
Very good. Michele, I know this was a big project to get organized. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to it and how you went about it?
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. Like everyone here at the table, I am motivated by my great concern for what's happening to planet Earth. And I think that concern has been exacerbated or enhanced by the fact that now that we have grandchildren, I'm really concerned. What kind of Earth are they going to inherit? What are their difficulties going to be? Will they be able to live according to a healthy and sustainable lifestyle? And because of that motivation, I decided to join Climate Action Now, which is a Western Mass organization. And some of the people there said, you know, it's really great that Long Meadow's a green community and that you're doing recycling and that, you know, you're working on bike paths. But we really need, they recommended that Long Meadow take the next step to political action and try to do something on a grander scale. And so we learned about carbon pricing legislation as a means to actually turn the entire economy of Massachusetts around so that we use much less carbon in the process of still being a dynamic economy. And I knew about Marc and transitions. We had several meetings and we decided to recap to try a second edition of a climate conference sponsored by Transition at St. Mary's Church. And we did that on June 3rd, and it was a grand success. We had 88 people at that conference and lots of interest. There are a lot of people in this town and surrounding towns that are concerned about this issue.
You raised some interesting points there, but let me ask you, how did you happen to choose those particular discussants?
The people, the panelists?
The panelists for the forum, yes.
Right. Well, Andrea was a natural choice because she had done the previous climate conference with Transitions. And one of the things, I don't want to steal your thunder, but one of the things that she talked about 2 years ago was the state of the world and the impact of climate change in all sorts of different sectors. And we thought it would be a wonderful opportunity to have her return and talk about how have things changed in the intervening 2 years. The second person that we asked to be a panelist is a woman named Cynthia, Michele, who works for the insurance company. And it's very, she's had 18 years of working for insurance companies. Right now she heads the insurance division of a nonprofit called Ceres, which is concerned about the impact of climate change on insurance costs. I mean, I think that insurance companies are being hit very hard by what's happening with all of these events. And then the third person that we brought in is a fellow named Dan Gotti, who was executive director of Climate Exchange. And his job was to talk about how can we reduce the impact of this disastrous climate change that's happening on a statewide level through legislation, specifically carbon pricing legislation. And he explained it, and it was our hope, all of the organizers, that people would get on board educating themselves about climate fair carbon legislation and make some phone calls and try to move this along.
Good. I'm going to come back in a moment to question you again about the mechanism of the legislation that's pending. But first, Andrea, can you tell us where we're standing right now? Are we holding our own in terms of carbon dissipation into the atmosphere, or are things getting worse, do you think?
Well, 2 years ago when I did the presentation about where we were in terms of greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide being the most abundant and the longest lasting, we were at we measure it in millions, and so we were at 372 parts per million. And 350.org, which is an organization that Bill McKibben started, had indicated that we should be not above 350. That's the best neutral place that we should be. Mm-hmm. We are, as I checked in for today's conversation, September clocked in at 397.64 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere. So we have, in a relatively short time, increased getting worse. And we are literally now on a precipice, which is one of passing what used to be hoped for as a mitigation component of can we reduce climate change sufficiently so that we can at least mitigate the damage, to how do we as humans adapt to the problems that climate change is causing. And we see it in various ways. We've had increased hurricane strengths, tornadoes, weather patterns. When we get any sort of water event, whether it be in snow or just plain rain, we have increased intensity of those events, and that's all an indication of the warming oceans and the warming air masses that are moving the water. So we are all experiencing the impact of climate change as we speak now. This morning, the New York Times had the article about how Greenland is melting away, and as it continues to do so, the impact of the ice melt on Greenland is projected to increase the sea level rise somewhere between 5 to 20 feet in a relatively short period of time, which means that every coastline is going to be impacted horrifically by the increased sea level. And I think one of the things that was brought out in the conference is that we are all paying for the cost of this, whether it be in increased premiums in our insurance companies, increased implications by lack of having utilities available because the power structure is going down, rebuilding infrastructures that have been pummeled. So when we talk about climate change, who's paying? Every one of us is paying in some measure at this point.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Marc, one of the things I heard you speak about earlier was the issue of why it's more significant that the ice mass on Greenland is melting as opposed to icebergs in the ocean. That may be something that some of our viewers are unclear as to why it's more significant for the one and not the other.
Well, I think that my understanding is that the ice that's on land, above water, when that melts, or ice floats that are on land melt, it's going to raise the water level. Whereas ice that's already in the water, like the Arctic Ocean, when that melts, that's not going to really affect directly the level of water. It does in the Arctic Ocean, because you've lost some of the reflective ability of ice to reflect some of the sunlight away from the Earth, it's going to have that effect, but not directly putting more water in the ocean. But the water that's trapped in ice above land, when that melts, it's going to fill up the basin of the ocean.
That makes sense because, in fact, the icebergs are 9/10 underwater already, so they're not really going to contribute that much. Good. Michele, let's get back to the legislation because that's really one of the issues I think that is driving our thinking about things that can be done potentially to mitigate the problems. Can you explain a little bit about the Barrett bill that's before the legislature right now?
Before I do that, what I want to say is that fair carbon legislation, carbon pricing, it's not only an issue that some states are considering. This has become, the literature says that it's become the new normal internationally. There are 40 countries that have adopted some form of carbon pricing thus far, including China. So there is an international awareness that this is going to be, we need to do something on a grand scale. Several years ago, Senator Mike Barrett, who represents, among the towns he represents Lexington, proposed a bill called an Act Combating Climate Change, Senate 1747. And this bill basically proposes a fee and rebate system in which there is a charge levied on fossil fuels at the production site. What does this mean in terms of the state of Massachusetts and its economy? It's important for us to know that I guess people would say the bad news is that fair carbon legislation has the potential of raising at the pump the cost of gas by 23 cents for the first year. So that may be considered bad news. But the good news is that at the end of the fiscal year, that fee that's been collected is returned to Massachusetts households and to Massachusetts businesses, so that we have the opportunity to welcome a check at the end of a year that is similar to an income tax rebate, let's say. And that kind of sweetens what could be considered the bitter pill of the fee. One of the things my husband mentioned to me the other day is this is a great opportunity for us because the cost of gasoline and oil is at a multi-year low. So, you know, we're not paying $4 a gallon now for gasoline. I've seen gasoline now for less than $2 a gallon. So the bitter pill may be a much tinier pill than otherwise. What I want to say about Mike Barrett's bill is that it appears to be gaining in popularity. There are now 44 co-sponsors from both the Senate and the House. And I became interested in it when Climate Action Now talked with me about what it was. And part of our motivation in having this conference is to really educate everybody about it, because I regarded myself as someone who was fairly educated about the climate and what we can do to mitigate negative impacts about pollution. But I had heard nothing about fair carbon pricing. And so through the conference and through this discussion, we're hoping to get people motivated to learn more about what this means. Very important for us to know that, and I have not, in the past 8 or 9 months since I've been working on this issue, I have not been capable of answering all the questions that people have about it. But I've charged into this headlong because of one huge historical fact. British Columbia adopted fair carbon legislation 7 years ago. And in the intervening 7 years, its carbon consumption as a province has diminished over 16%, while all other provinces in Canada have increased their carbon consumption. In addition to that, the economy of British Columbia has boomed. So there's been no negative pull down on the economy. Also positives are the fact that the corporate income tax has been reduced by 20% in the past 7 years. The personal income tax in British Columbia has been reduced by 10%. These are all good things. And even though, British Columbia is far away from us, I think we view Canadians as living a lifestyle and having an economy that pretty much resembles our own.
Mm-hmm.
So if it can work there, and it has worked there, it can work here. And that's what keeps me charged up about this.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to thank our panelists for their time this evening. I know that those folks who are viewing this would like to get more information. We encourage you to become involved. There are several organizations that you can tap into on the internet. These include climateactionnow.org, 350.org, theclimatereality.org, and longmeadowtransition.org. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.